Hello, I'm Grant Langdon, Assistant Director of Career Services,
I'm Walker Derby. I'm the other Assistant Director in Career Services.
and welcome to this resumes presentation. And the question I often get right away about resumes is, can AI write my resume? Are there programs online that can just write my resume for me and make this whole process a lot easier? They exist, but the product is not good enough. The resume will not be good enough. It's just so much better if you can write it yourself. So there are ways that AI, especially generative AI, using large language models can help you in the process and help you writing maybe portions of it. But in the end, that AI doesn't know enough about you to create a good enough content that's not specific enough for you. And even if you get something, you have to know whether it's good enough or not. And so that's what this presentation is going to help you do, is understand what makes a good resume, how you can write a good resume, and then if you want to use AI to like supplement some stuff in there, then maybe you can do that at your own risk. But either way, we're here to help you make sure that your resume is good, it represents you well, and it aligns with the job description that you're applying for. So let's figure out now what a resume is. So for you, the resume gets you an interview. That's almost always all it's going to do. So you want them to be excited about you, want to get to know you, and call you to get an interview. So that's it. And it often is just a one-page document that explains your relevant and impressive skills and accomplishments, and often how those experiences translate into skills. That is also important.
A lot of times I hear people say when we're working on resumes, oh, I don't need to go into detail on that. I'll just explain it in the interview, right? But to Grant's point here, this document needs to get you that interview. So when in doubt, adding some of those relevant details, which you're going to talk about later, can be really important. So I want to talk about that right up front. You got to get into the interview before you can explain it. So if you think, oh, I'll just explain it in the interview, it's probably a good idea to make sure you're including that specifically on your
100%. But you also, whenever you're writing anything, you're thinking about who's the reader and what are they looking for. And so it's good to consider the purpose of a resume for the employer. Now, they are often looking through dozens or hundreds of applicants' resumes, and they have a list of things that they're looking for, often called the qualifications or requirements. Is this correct, Walker? So what you need to do is make sure that those requirements are easy to find and as easy as possible, so that that recruiter, that hiring manager can see, oh yeah, they meet all of these requirements. I'm excited to read more about their resume, and I don't have to like seek and find like how it matches and try to like make guesses or assumptions. You got to be real clear and clearly connect how your experiences connect with the qualifications for that job. So employers have programs that help them sift through applicants and resumes as well, and those are often called applicant tracking systems, or ATS. And I don't know, Walker, did you have one of those in a prior job that you used?
Yeah, so I did recruiting here at our local health system for about 5 years prior to being here in Career Services, and we absolutely did. So an applicant would apply using their resume. Oftentimes that resume then got distilled into different categories based on what the AI kind of thought that those categories needed to be. So being able to understand how an ATS works and what it's looking for is really beneficial when you're creating your resume as well, because oftentimes if you can't get through that computer software, that AI ahead of time, it's never going to make it into the hands of a real person.
Yep. And so we'll spend some time later talking specifically what your resume needs to contain in order to get past that applicant tracking system. But it's good to right now just know that they use a system to help rapidly sift through, and even some applicant tracking systems will just rank, like these are the top 10 candidates that match this job description. So you've got to get past that ATS first before even a human will read it likely. So there are some required sections on a resume, and resumes come in sections because you want your resume to be as easily readable as possible. So having your stuff hidden in places or funky columns and things that don't make sense where a reader has to like figure out where your different sections are. That just makes it hard for them. Again, you want to make it easy for them to find what they're looking for. So that's why we use clear sections in your resume. So your contact information clearly at the top. That's an easy one. And then the education section is a required section. So for you right now, you're probably a student, recent graduate, whatever you are, your education is a really big relevant accomplishment for you. And when you look at the jobs you're applying for, almost all of them are going to have an education requirement right there at the top, whether that you're in class at some point at a university, or you have completed a degree, or have semesters completed towards a bachelor's degree, that there's going to be some education requirements. So you want to have that education section pretty close to the top too. So that's why it's a required section. And then the bulk of your resume is going to be this relevant experience section. And that can include work experience, internships, volunteer stuff, your student organizations, projects that you've done potentially. So it doesn't need to be just your work experience, because sometimes some work experience is more relevant than others. And then there's a bunch of optional sections that, depending on your experience and the experience that your employer is looking for, that you could use. So an objective statement can be a little hit or miss here. So a lot of employers have seen, if they see objective on a resume, they might just like roll their eyes at it and be like, okay, and not even read it. I've even heard people say like, oh, if there's an objective statement on the top of a resume, I just like toss it, because it's like because they've had such bad experience with objective statements. So, and generally, I don't like having an objective statement, like objective label on there. But what you can have at the top of a resume is basically a summary or a statement that says specifically why you want to work at this company at this job. And this is really powerful when you're not going to be using a cover letter, because a cover letter often tells really specifically why you want to work there and how your values and your interests and your skills align with what they're doing. But if you don't have a cover letter to do that for you, you have like a couple sentences to try to do that at the top of a resume. Is that similar to what you would say?
Absolutely. Yep. 100%.
Sweet. So relevant coursework, another optional section that we'll get into a little bit more, because we're going to dive deeper into each of these sections here soon. And then here are just some other optional sections depending on what type of things that you have. Okay, so at the bottom here I have qualifications as an optional section. I would dare say that almost every resume that I make these days has a qualification section, because it's the easiest way to clearly communicate how you meet the qualifications for the job. So if you have that qualification section right underneath your contact information and it clearly explains how you meet it, it just means that the recruiter's going to be like, oh yeah, okay, they meet all of our qualifications, and then they'll continue on to see the details of how you did a lot of the stuff that you've done. But the things that you're going to have in your resume are your like most relevant, your biggest accomplishments, and you're always going to be trying to connect it back to like the job that you're applying for. Okay, so in a resume, you're including your relevant things, but some of you might be thinking like, oh, all I've got is like, I worked part-time jobs that aren't like relevant to this what I'm looking to do. Well, that's why you've learned a lot more than you think you have, trust me. Doing it, even worked in like food service or retail, working on a farm, all this kind of stuff, you're gaining skills and experiences. And so there's a lot of transferable skills that you are developing while you're in these part-time jobs that might not obviously connect with your future jobs. And some of those are where if you've ever trained somebody, or you worked in a team, you've done like inventory management or customer service, or if you're ever like leading a team or having to like direct a project, or you're researching or presenting your research. If you're going through a lot of the programs here at NMU, you're probably going to have to do a lot of presenting and researching for almost all of your majors. But the things that you're communicating are that they're important. And so you're going to have to tell them why it's important. Especially for things that they don't know what it means, or like why you're including it on your resume, you're going to have to explain some detail in there of like how you did it, why it was important, what were the results. And so some examples of what makes things important could be if it was like a high pressure situation, or if there was like a lot of interpersonal communication or conflict that you had to like overcome that makes that experience important. And in the end, your resume is going to evolve a lot, both over time as you gain experience from class to class and semester to semester, but also your resume is going to evolve a little bit based on the types of jobs that you're applying for. So that can sound like a lot, because gone are the days where you just make one resume and you just hand it out to every employer out there. You've got to tailor that resume specifically for that job. But how do you keep track of all your stuff? Well, we've got a really good way to do that, and that's if you create a master resume. Now, the master resume, honestly, is similar. It's just a list of stuff. It's like all of the classes that you've taken, your impressive projects that you like worked really hard on, an explanation of what that project was, all of your classes, or your jobs that you've had, your volunteer experiences, and getting into like the details of like what did you do in those jobs, what were the things the challenges you overcame, like how many people did you work with, all of that kind of detail you can just kind of like list into this master resume that ends up being a pretty large document. That way, when you're creating your actual resume that's going to be tailored for a job, you can just pull over what you need to, and that way you're not going to forget the like important dates and duties of all of your past experiences. So here is an example of what a resume can look like. Showing this to you just so you can see that there are some common things that we'll want to have in there. Your name is going to be big and bold at the top, easy to read. And then you'll see like we've got clearly defined major sections, like your education section, your relevant experience section, and skills is an optional section. And in fact, oftentimes we get rid of skills sections, but it depends on what your major is and what they're looking for. Sometimes the skills section can be helpful and other times it's not. But what you're looking at here is that the dates are easy to read on their own, they're right justified. So many templates that you'll find online have the dates like jammed in there, like hidden underneath the job title, and it can make it just kind of hard to read and it kind of looks like a cluster. So this makes it easy to read, it's easy to find what each of these experiences are.
A quick note about dates too, coming from my recruiting background again. It is really, really important to make those clear, and it serves not only because it helps alleviate a little confusion, two, it makes the document look better. Having your dates right aligned really centers up the page so it's cleaner. But the third thing is that a lot of positions are either going to require that you have X amount of experience doing something. And if a recruiter is looking at that and they have to figure out how to quantify that experience and the dates are really hard to find, they're going to get really frustrated really quickly, and that's going to be a huge turnoff. You know, if you need 5 years of industry experience or 2 years of industry experience and that's not immediately obvious, they may pass you up. One final note on that. Depending on which industry you're working in, you might be involved with some union regulations, and the amount of time you spend in an industry may have a direct effect on the salary they're able to offer you per the union contract. So having those dates so that you can really clearly articulate how long you've been doing something can be really important. I remember having a few people who would, seemingly only have a few years of experience, and we go to present them with an offer and they'd say, well, wait, I've been doing this for 15. And, per the union, now I'm owed for that time. Well, I didn't see that. We hadn't seen that on the resume, and they had to come back and clarify when they'd done everything. So kind of a hassle for everyone involved. So again, really important to have those dates as obvious as you can.
So other things that you might want to have at the top that aren't mentioned on this resume is if you have a LinkedIn, a personal website, or portfolio website, you can have those links right at the top. And even a lot of applicant tracking systems, if it's like a hyperlink in the PDF that you submit them, it will make it hyperlink so that the reader can read it as well through the applicant tracking system. But in the end, it's easy to read. That's your goal. All right, let's dive into these sections and make sure we're clear on what to expect in each of them. So in the education section, you're going to write out Bachelor of Science, not BS. And then you can put your major. So on the right side here, we have like an example, Bachelor of Science in Biology. And then you're going to spell out Northern Michigan University, Marquette, Michigan. So this goes for every of these like subsections within a section. You're going to have the organization and the place that it was, the city and the state. And then like we had on our previous example here where we had the dates on the same line as the top and have them in bold, I prefer that. It's easier to read. Because in this example here on the right, we have Northern Michigan University, Marquette, Michigan, and then May 2024, having it on that line. I'd prefer if it was on the line above. Your minor, that matters. So having that in there, that's important. Your GPA, if it's above 3.0, having that in there. And then some of these other honors or awards, scholarships, those can be helpful to show the level of achievement that you have academically. Some things that you also want to notice here is the relevant coursework section. And this isn't where you put in your like GC 205 or SO 101. All of those course designations don't mean anything to an employer. Also, you don't want to just put in like every class that might be relevant. This relevant coursework section is where you highlight 3 to 5 classes and use the class titles. So if you are doing going to be doing some sort of accounting and you have a class that is about that type of accounting, then that would be good to show that you have that specific type of experience. Some other ways I've seen this work really well is if you're planning to work with a Native American population and you've taken a lot of Native American studies classes, you can have those in there to really show how you are dedicated to learning about their culture and their people. And that can work if you're going to be working in an area with that's like a lot of Spanish speaking. You've taken a lot of Spanish classes, but it's not like your major or your minor. That can be really helpful. Any other ways that you've seen this relevant coursework be really helpful?
I think you covered most of them. Again, it's a little bit specific to where you're applying, like you said, but both geographically and with the organization. So if you need any help with that, come talk to us. We're really happy to really deep dive on what we think might be kind of the most pertinent to where you're headed.
Yeah, I've also done relevant coursework section even a little differently, where instead of putting the classes, I'll put the projects. We'll have like a bullet list of like a few projects that are really highlighting the skills and the experience that you've done in class that directly relate with the job that you're applying for. And that's also could be in the qualification section instead. But as long as it's like those class projects that you've been doing, that's been like really hard and annoying, those mean something. Those can be on your resume and those can really make a difference that directly show the experience that you've got and how it matches with the job that you're applying for. So your faculty are doing the right thing and challenging you with these difficult projects. So certifications or licenses, this section, if you need a certification for your job or a license for your job, it's important that they have their own section and it's clearly defined that you have them. But if you don't need a certification or license, you may not need this section at all. If you take the scuba class and you get scuba certified, that's cool. And sometimes it can be a fun conversation piece, and it might be something that's like the bottom of your resume, like a certifications saying like, oh yeah, I'm first aid and scuba, but it may not be directly related. And so could be at the bottom as just showing a little bit more like character, a little bit more interests. I don't know if you've seen that much in the resumes you've worked with.
I agree with you. I think if it's specific to the position, obviously you're going to want to put it on there. But if it's something fun and unique, I think scuba is a good example of that. And you have room.
Yeah,
it can go on here certainly. But if you're applying for a position where it's not important and you're really struggling to find a space to put scuba on there, maybe scuba doesn't belong there.
Yeah, definitely. But if you're like the Michigan teaching certificate, if you're going into education, it's like that is required. Like you've got to have that. Or you say that you're planning to take it at a certain date, like in the future, something like that. Okay. So your relevant experience section, this is where you get most of your resume is going to be this. And so each subsection underneath relevant experience is going to be like a job or an internship, a volunteer experience. And I recommend starting with or labeling each subsection with the job title. And so for this case here, we have like intern. But intern is, I think, not a good enough job title, because every intern you're doing some things. There's like some specialization, some tasks that you're doing, so that we could have a better name of what type of intern that you are. So that when the recruiters are reading that, they can quickly get an understanding of like what type of work you're doing as an intern at Grant's Greenhouse. And so maybe it's a like plant cultivation intern, anything. So think about what you're doing as an intern. And what you're not going to put is just the simple, like, you sold plants to customers or interacted with customers. Like, that's just too broad, and it doesn't tell them how you did it, because everybody interacts with customers a little differently, and everybody does things a little bit differently. And the things that they talk about in their resume is the things that they are prioritizing in their process of doing whatever they're doing. So some better examples of things is you cultivated, provided care for hundreds of plant species using anatomy and physiology concepts to maximize plant sale revenue. So what makes this a much better bullet point example is that you're talking about the hundreds of plant species. So that means you got to know a lot about the different plants, and you're using the concepts that you've learned in class, this anatomy and physiology of plants. But you're connecting it to the overall organization for the goal, or the goal of the organization, and that's the plant revenue, the making sales. So another way that you can make bullets is analyze, examine, interpret account records, compile financial information, and reconcile reports and financial data. That seems like a list, right? It is a list. And in fact, this type of bullet point really only is used when you're like out of space with your much more fleshed out bullet points, but there's like a bunch of other things that you've done, but you just want to make sure that gets included in there. You can kind of make a list like this. But ideally, if you've got the space, almost each one of these things could be their own bullet point that what did you analyze? What did you examine? What type of account records were you interpreting, and what for? And what was the results? And you're compiling financial information. What financial information? And how did you do that? Like, were there certain techniques or philosophies or pieces of equipment or like technologies that you use to do that? There's just so much information that's lacking in that listing format that you would have to have that elsewhere for that type of bullet point to be good. So a little bit more on bullets. More numbers, more better. That's usually the rule. So here's an example of a bullet. Utilized RFID technology with custom-made antenna perches in RStudio to collect and observe chickadee population data over more than 8 years. So you can think like right now, how would you add more numbers to that bullet point? Any ideas out there? So some ways that you could do it is you think about like these custom-made antenna perches. Well, how many were you making? Did you make 1 or 2 or 10 or 15? The amount that you do matters to the level of experience that you have doing that thing. So that's important. So, and you're collecting data on chickadee population, but like over how many chickadee populations and how many data points are you collecting about these chickadee populations? And better yet, like what were the results of this? What were you looking for when you're looking through all this data? So there's almost always ways that you can try to think like, how can I quantify this more to give more context? That's always helpful. And so if you don't know the numbers and the impact for your job, talk to your supervisor about it, because they are usually required to know like how well things are going in their area, whether or not their salespeople are selling, their servers are doing well. And you can ask them like, oh, how many customers do we see during like a day? Or what's our like sales revenue per day? Like, how big is our facility? These are things that you can add 2 bullet points to add context so that somebody who knows nothing about you, they can understand, like, okay, it's a big place, or they're working with a lot of customers all the time, or they're handling a lot of money or a little bit of money. So that's really important to know. And so something that we talk about a lot is adding some results or quantifiable results within a bullet point to show the impact of the work that you're doing. You're going to have to ask your supervisor almost always, okay, like, how well am I doing? Am I doing as well as the other servers or the other salespeople, whatever you're doing? And are there ways that you are directly impacting the organization? Like, are there like big projects that you can work on to contribute to so that you can have those projects on your bullet points later? You'll have to think about that. So let's get into some more bullet point information here. So there's 2 main ways that I like to do bullet points. There's a duties approach, where you kind of follow this formula where you did a thing by doing a thing and the results of you doing that thing. So if you like variables in math, you can say performed X by doing Y resulting in Z. And so you're always going to start with a verb. And if it can be a verb that is the skill you're trying to convey that you have, then that's like bonus points, because it's easier for them to see, like, okay, they have the skill. It's the first word that they have in their bullet point. And so some examples are collaborated, organized, led, designed, created, those that are verbs but also skills. That's bonus points. The other way that you can write bullet points is the accomplishment focused ones. And so this is where you are stating the effect before the cause, or like what was the result of your work and how you did it. So if you think about any like commercials or ads that you're watching, almost all of them will say, like, here's a product. If you buy this product, this is the effect it's going to have on you. This is what the result of your purchase will have, this effect on you. And then it'll explain how it works a little bit. And that's the same way that these work. You can start with the effect on the organization and then how you did it. And so the verbs that start these are like improved, expanded, increased, optimized, that type of stuff. So some other notes on bullet points. You want to think about what results do you know from your past experiences. And we talked about this a little bit, but what often you got to do, you've got to might have to talk to a previous supervisor to figure that out. But you can also plan ahead and think, like, what are some great results, great project results that I would want to have on my resume? And then you can talk to your supervisor now and say, hey, I'm just thinking ahead and I'd love to like help you with some like big projects. Is there something that you've been thinking about that you want to have done but just haven't had the time to do it? And they might be like, wow, I've never had anybody ask me that question before. And they might be like, oh yeah, we actually would love to do this, but I haven't had the time to do it. Would you want to like start thinking about how to tackle that? And then you can be like, yeah, I'll do that. And then you're thinking about like, man, I'm going to get some great quantifiable results on my resume that shows like how I impacted this organization. That's what gets employers like interest like crazy. They're like, whoa, they went out of their way and like created this project or this program at their workplace. That's different than everyone else who works there. And this can also be good for if you're working or if you're going to class, you're interacting with your faculty members, or they're just teaching you things, and you go up to them and ask them about the type of research that they're doing, like and the research that you are interested in doing. And maybe there's a way that you two can work together and that you can help them with something, because most faculty are doing some sort of research. If it's not the faculty that you're talking to right at this moment, it might be one in another class. But almost every department, there are faculty there that are doing projects and research outside of teaching class, and they almost always need students to help with those. But you've got to ask and you've got to talk to them in order to know about it for the most part. So get out there and talk to your faculty. So some other bonus tips is you can ask people that are already in the field what types of projects should you be focusing on? Are there skills that you need to be gaining? And some ways to do that are, if you look at the Alumni Mentor Program, and so you can just Google NMU Alumni Mentor Program. There's a website that explains what that is and how to apply for it. Wildcats Connect is another great tool. And this is right on the hub at NMU, that app that has all of the events that are happening on campus. There's an organization that's Wildcats Connect, and it has over 1,000 alumni that joined that group intentionally looking to help students and give advice. And so you can ask them, like, hey, I'm going into this field. What are some projects or skills or experiences that I'd really need to have to be successful? And someone will likely respond. And even if nobody responds, it doesn't hurt you. So it's worth asking. So here's some examples of some bullet points. So you design and execute small-scale testing to validate control algorithms derived to simulate seismic force resistance in 3 test groups. So this sounds like somebody's like doing some research, right? The verbs that they're using, the design and execute, like that, those are strong. They're showing it's a skill that they are designing and running research, and then explains how they're doing it. And they're using really specific terminology to the field that shows that they know what they're talking about. So another example, you authored 2 policy memos to the city of Marquette encouraging adoption of community-centered climate solutions within transportation and economic development. So that's another great one. Authored 2 policy memos that if they only read that much of the bullet, they're going to be like, oh, wow, that's cool. And that's something that a lot of students do. And it goes into the detail of what those are. And then simultaneously increase sales and price by 25% of all drinks while maintaining or increasing client base. This was actually a bartender that I had been working with and was able to do this because he was like such a good bartender that people would come and make sure they would stop by if they were in town to see if they were working the bar and have a drink. And it was pretty impressive what they were able to do. So some more bullet point stuff. You're not going to be using the words my or I in your resume at all. It's always assumed that you're talking about yourself. Though when you're writing your LinkedIn, you'll need to, that is typically written in first person. And you're going to use similar vocabulary and phrasing to what's found in the organization's website and professional organizations or the job description that you're applying for. Using the same vocabulary is important. And that's especially important if they're going through an applicant tracking system. And you don't leave the reader to fill in the gaps. You've got to say like how you did it. Why was it important? With whom did you work with? How many there were there? Were you working with a team of 5? Did you do it independently? All of that's important information to communicate the context. And these relevant specific terms, so the piece of equipment and technology that you're using to accomplish all of these things, the processes, the philosophies, the techniques, those are important details in there as well, because it shows you know what you're talking about. You're smart enough to figure it out. And so this is a great page that I use a lot for trying to start a bullet point. So I'm just going to pull this up real quick. So Resume Worded is a company that has some sort of product that helps with resume writing. I don't use their product, but I use this page a lot because it's really helpful. So you're thinking about things that you've done and you're like, okay, well, I've done some leadership stuff. So what are some verbs about leadership? And then it lists out a pile of verbs for leadership. I'm like, okay, well, yeah, I did some guiding. You can think like, oh, I led, I did some presented. And even just like reading through these, you might get inspired or remember like, oh yeah, I did this other thing too. Like, oh yeah, I was awarded something. And then you can always go back and like, all right, well, I also did some research and analysis for this class that I was in. And think, what are some verbs to do there? Like, oh yeah, I had to do some evaluation. I had to examine things. I tested stuff, identified. So this is just a great way to get started thinking about your verbs. And then if you want a more comprehensive guide, you can check out this one here. So JobScan has this great guide. And JobScan is a company that they have another product that helps you write resumes, where it's like you paste in your resume and then paste in the job description, and it'll say how well it matches through the eyes of an applicant tracking system, which can be helpful. But you could also just come and see us and we'll do that for free. And then we'll help you write it as well. So some other section headings. Achievements or accomplishments could be something, if you've got something like that that's relevant to the work. Your involvements, or like campus involvements, can be really helpful in showing that you are living the values of potentially the organization that you're working for. That also goes with volunteer work. And so with volunteer work, this is not something like you did make a difference day one time. This volunteer work that you have on your resume would be something that you've done multiple times, that you would want to talk about in your interview. And that's a good note, is anything on your resume, you got to be ready to talk about in your interview. So campus involvements, here's some really common campus involvements at NMU. So if you're part of ASNMU, no one knows what that is. You got to spell that out. So acronyms, you generally don't use them, or you use them like this, where they are afterward in parentheses. And it's important that even spelling out Associated Students of Northern Michigan University, what does that mean? It's the student government. So that's like, again, communicating why it's important. Like, what does it mean? And you can't expect employers and recruiters to look up things on your resume. You've got to communicate that clearly. So NMU Superior Edge, and explaining what that is. And if you have like edges completed, like you have 100 hours of leadership experience or 200 hours of volunteer and leadership experience, stating that clearly gives that meaning, and it gives it a lot of meaning. And if you aren't a part of Superior Edge yet, it's a great program where you track all of your volunteer experience, your leadership experience. So that way when you're writing your resume later, you can pull that up your logs and remember all of the details of what you did to get those hours of experience. So that's a big help. NMU's Student Leader Fellowship Program, or SLFP, that's also a really good program that gives you a lot of leadership experience. There's like a leadership course, you're doing like a community service internship that you have to be doing at least 100 hours. That can be really helpful and go right onto your resume. Even active in house government can be helpful if you have some accomplishments that are along with it. Like you going to attending house meetings isn't worth being on your resume, but if you were like leading events and doing other things that are worth talking about, that could be in there. And you're not going to include references available upon request, because if they want your references, you're going to give them. And your references sheet is going to be a separate document. So back on some bullets. Many people have been servers, believe it or not. And so I wanted to like throw this, here's some decent bullet points about being a server. And so the worked lunch and dinner shifts and took orders, that's what you're not going to do on your resume, because there's just not enough detail. But what you did do is you managed a 5 to 7 table section, and you interacted with various large parties. And I've even had it like, it'll be like parties of 5 to 50. Like if you, that number matters as well. Like if you've got a lot of large parties that you're dealing with, that changes what that means. And you're connecting it to like the overall goal of like you're building return business and regulars. That's important as well, knowing why you're doing something. And then so you receive and enter orders accurately in a point of sale system. So that's showing that you can like learn a piece of technology. And then if you're collaborating with 10 plus team members, so I've actually like made this much better in a lot of the bullets that I've done recently by talking about the different groups of people that you're communicating with as a server. Because if you've ever noticed, like they have to be communicating with the host, they're communicating with the line cooks, they're communicating with their manager, and the other servers. And so there's a lot of communication that runs through servers all the time. And that's an important skill that you're developing while doing that job that is relevant to almost every other job that you're going to do. And then if there's oftentimes other tasks that you're doing while you're doing there. So if you're doing like inventory checks with your manager or something like that, you can think like, what are some other things that you do? Maybe it's not something you do every shift, but it's something you do occasionally. that could still be a part of your resume. So do you need bullet points for every experience on there? Since you want your resume generally to be one page, maybe like some people have enough relevant experience where it's 2 pages, but in the end, you want to be concise in some areas. So if you're like a member of some organizations, you can just have that in here in this type of format, where you have the organization, your role, and the dates. Dates are important. Okay, let's talk about applicant tracking systems real quick. So here's some great ways to get past them. And I want you to be looking up keywords for your industry. So you can do that by looking up on LinkedIn, different people that are doing the work, the similar job titles that you're applying for. What are the things that they're talking about? You can look up the company and their mission, their values, the projects that they're working on, so that you can understand what are the language that they're using. A really great one is professional organizations that are in your industry. Just honestly, just Google professional organizations and then your major, and you'll find a list. And you can go and join them. You can look what they're talking about and look at the problems that they're discussing, and you'll find all sorts of great keywords. And so finding keywords for some people, it can be like really easy, and some people it's like, wow, there's like literally pages and pages of text here. There's a great tool out there that can really synthesize and extract from piles of text, and that's generative AI out there. So we're talking about like ChatGPT is the current like kind of leader. Bard from Google is really good. Even there's a few other ones out there that can do that for you. But you can paste in a pile of text and ask it, what are some common keywords that I would want to include in a resume from this document? Bam, and it'll pull them out for you. And it's usually pretty good explaining why you would have that in there as well, so you can learn along the way. So looking up other job descriptions that are similar, you can do that with Handshake, LinkedIn, Indeed. I put Handshake in there because it has jobs that are mostly for students. And the companies that are putting their jobs on Handshake, they know that they're going to be seen by college students and maybe recent graduates. So the jobs that are on there usually are for you at your stage of life. If you look on LinkedIn, Indeed, you're going to find thousands more jobs, but they're going to require 2 years experience, 5 years experience, 15 years of experience, and you're going to be spending a lot of time sifting through that. But in the end, you're going to want to understand what are the things that you need to put in there. And the job description that you're applying for is the best place to find that exact language. But there's a lot of other places as well. So the way the applicant tracking systems work is they take your document and they read it top to bottom, left to right. And depending on how you wrote your resume, columns can be a big problem, because especially if you're using Canva, Canva makes beautiful posters, great invites for your little house parties, super good tool for that. But when you're exporting a document made in Canva, the text is a part of an image, and it's often not readable at all by an applicant tracking system, which makes it hard for a recruiter to get it if they're using an ATS. So anyway, so columns in general, we try to avoid those, and that's why the example we showed earlier didn't have any columns in it. But if you Google like how to write a resume or resume templates or examples, almost all of them have columns, almost all of them have like graphics or colors on them. And all those graphics, what they do is, like, an ATS can't read a graphic. It just says like, okay, there's a JPEG there. And then it usually will flag it as like, well, they can't read this. And so you're not going to be at the top of the list of most qualified applicants just because you put a like small graphic on your resume. So just stick to text and avoid columns, and it'll be easy to read, easy for them to find stuff. The applicant tracking system will be able to read through it just fine. And anyway, it's not the look of your resume that gets you the job, it's the bullet points and what your experiences are and how you describe them.
So I think another really good point here is if you are using one of the many, many templates that's available online, one of the first things you're going to notice is they're really, really flashy, but they don't often do a good job of managing space on the page. So, you know, they might look great, but think about how, in the example that Grant provided earlier, there's a full page of text available for you to use. If you start calling stuff out, putting things in different places, things like that, that takes up a lot of usable document space where you could be describing your skills a little bit better. Additionally, I don't think I've ever had somebody come into my office with a template resume that said this was easy to edit after the fact. Yeah. I think every day of the week somebody comes in and they're like, yeah, I got this from a template. And I go, okay, have you had any trouble kind of rearranging things, or if you had to add something to this, was that easy to do? And it never is. There's so many columns and so many pieces that are spliced together that it's really, really challenging to effectively manipulate after the fact. So having a nice clean document with none of that crazy formatting is going to, I think, be beneficial in the long term when you're trying to add, subtract things to the document.
Absolutely. Wow. All right, some other formatting things. You're going to stick to one page most of the time. Unless you're applying to USA Jobs, they want to know everything you've ever done, and they want to know every duty that you did pretty much in every job, and explain how you did it and why it's important. So I've seen USA Jobs resumes be anywhere from like 3 pages to 9 pages long. They want everything. But for everyone else, I would try to aim for 1 page and just keeping it 1 page of really relevant and impressive things. And the font size, I start at 11 because you could go from down to 10 if you need to, up to 12 if you want to. So 11 is a good starting point. And then you can even wiggle it even half font sizes. Those margins, 1/2 inch to 1 inch, that's another one of those areas where to like get it to fit perfectly in a page, you can adjust it by like a 1/10 of an inch, top, bottom, left, right, that type of stuff. Your fonts, your Times New Romans, your Arials, Calibris, in the end, you want it to be easily read. So you can use the one that you like the most, or that you might fit the brand that you're applying for the best. If they are using a serif font or a sans serif font, you might want to match what they're trying to do. And again, skipping on photos, colors. You can have colors on your text if you really, really want to, but in the end, it's not really that helpful because it's the content of your bullets that it gets you the interview, not whether you used blue text for your headings. They don't really care about that. So, and again, your resumes are going to be tailored to that specific job and the role. And this doesn't mean you have to create something from scratch. This often means you're just updating like a few of your qualifications, just changing maybe a bullet point here and there to make sure that it's clearly communicating how you meet those qualifications. And again, so resumes are subjective. This is like where employers, they might say they want to hear about specific experiences in your past. And so reading the fine print, and this is especially important if you're going to grad school and you're writing a personal statement, or your CV or resume, they might say specifically things that they want in there. So reading the fine print on that job description is incredibly important. And some little other formatting tips, balancing your white space. So Walker talked about like some templates, they have a lot of like white space. And if you use the format that we use, it honestly gives enough white space. Having the space between your job title and the date, that adds enough space, white space in there for sure. And your bullets and headers and dates are all lined up exactly on the same line. So I'm always like, we get a resume set up and we like sit back and just analyze and be like, yeah, okay, those bullet points are lined up exactly. Because especially if you're using like some sort of template that you didn't make yourself, it can be really easy to be like, okay, this bullet point is like 1/10 of an inch different than the others, or it gets real annoying. So you just got to make sure those line up really well so that that's not a distraction. They're looking at they're reading your resume, not being like, wow, this looks off. So we're happy to help you with using any type of formatting with Microsoft Word, Google Docs. Honestly, Google Docs has become my favorite because it's so easy to collaboratively work on documents and share documents and make sure that you have the most up-to-date document that you're working on. You're not trying to figure out, I have 5 different Word documents for this resume, which one is my most recent one. So Google Docs has solved a lot of problems with that. So fonts, if you're going to use like Times New Roman or whatever throughout the whole thing, that's what we'd recommend. Potentially you could have like your section headings be a different font, but in the end it's not really necessary. Keeping the same size throughout, except maybe your section headings, I think that works. Like sometimes your section headings, like your education section, can be like one step bigger, but it doesn't have to be. It could just be all caps and bolded or underlined, that type of thing. So some general tips. So if you're handing in your resume, so you're going to the job fair, you're bringing some resumes, you want those resumes to be on a better quality paper than your standard printer stuff. And so we can print your resume for you right from our career services office. We can do like 10 at a time. And we've got a little bit thicker paper that has like a texture to it that just feels a little bit better to hold. And so that might seem like the littlest detail, but in the grand scheme of these things, all these little details, they all add up to being something big and something significant. And you're going to save and submit your digital resumes as a PDF. And so some used to say like do it as like a Word document file, but in the end that can be a problem, especially because not every person even has Microsoft Word on their computer, but everyone can open a PDF. And the PDF saves your spacing so much better. I've seen a lot of documents that have come through in Microsoft Word that the preview or something like that will show it and the spacing will be really unaligned and like, what happened here? And they're looking at it like, that's not what I sent you. Like it's just not good. Stick to a PDF. And as far as file naming, that is another important and often overlooked part of resumes. Since you're going to be creating resumes for a bunch of different employers, it can be really helpful to have like your name, the employer name, and resume as the document title. So that way you're not getting confused and accidentally sending the wrong resume to the wrong employer. As I've heard that happen, and it doesn't look good. You don't get an interview. One mistake that you can fix just by making sure your files are named correctly. And then proofread. This is something you've been told to do since you were in middle school. But it's like that 5-minute proofread is the difference between getting an interview and potentially a job and not. Just do it. And also, have somebody else proofread it. You can come and meet with us. We'll proofread it. We'll make sure that thing is super aligned to the job that you're applying for. And there aren't a bunch of typos everywhere. Okay, here is an example of things. It has some notes from some faculty on here in red. So this text at the top that doesn't have a section heading on it, that could be your summary, your like kind of description there. And that's where you could be describing like the position that you're applying for and why you're doing it. You're tying you to the employer. And it's not always recommended that you do that, and can be seen as fluff if you don't clearly explain like why it's important that you have that in there. So this is where you have a qualification section right below it. And this has got to be specific to your experience and how it meets the qualifications for the job. And then some other notes here, the relevant experience section. You could name this something else depending on the type of experiences that you have. So you might have a bunch of research experience and you're applying for a research internship or research job. You could call, instead of relevant experience, research experience. So I always try to narrow that down if I can, instead of just saying relevant experience, based on what you're doing. And down at the bottom red arrow, the campus involvements. This could also be things like conferences attended, your presentations that you've done. It potentially could be like interests and activities if those interests align with the organizational values. So if you're going to be working for an environmental agency and you have a lot of like hiking and backpacking experience, and you are in both an environmental activist in your professional life and in your personal life, that can be helpful in showing that in your resume. So what matters most overall? Your resume has got to be clean looking, it's got to be consistent, and it's got to be relevant. And if you're trying to figure out, okay, I've got 100 different things I've done, how do I prioritize which things to be in there? Just come and make a meeting with us, And you can do that right through Handshake. Go to the Career Center, hit appointments, make an appointment. We can help you with a lot of things to help you get the job that you want. Even if right now you're like a freshman, sophomore, you're like just starting your college experience, we can help you make a plan on what are those experiences that you're going to need to get your ideal job. And if you don't know your ideal job, we can help you figure that out too. We've got the tools to help you out. We want to make sure you get the most out of your degree and your time here. So Wildcats Connect, just mentioning that again, you can use this to ask questions about your career, even if you're moving to an area, like is there somebody that lives nearby that could like give some advice on something. I've had actually that work successfully and someone get a job because they asked, they're moving to Boston, and they're like, and anyone living in Boston that knows any companies in this industry, and they're like, oh yeah, I know somebody actually that works in that industry. And it's like, you never know, might as well ask. And just a couple things that you're going to have as a part of your applications often are a cover letter, and we can help you write that. We've got a lot of resources for that one. Reference list. Oh, I want to bring one more 30 seconds about cover letters. If you Google how to write cover letters, all you're going to find is companies trying to sell you a product to write you cover letters. And all those cover letters, they sound the same. And it makes it so frustrating for employers because all they see is basically the same template over and over again. It's to the point where they hate cover letters. So we've got some great advice and tools on cover letters that we can share with you. Your reference list, that's going to be a separate document, not on your resume. Your portfolio or LinkedIn or personal website, these are things that really help you show employers what you do, the type of work, the quality of work that you can do, instead of just telling them how you do it. And those can be incredibly important, and we can help you set some of those up as well. So there are job fairs soon. No matter what time you're viewing this video, there is a job fair coming soon that you can be a part of, whether it's this semester or next. And you can check what job fairs are coming on Handshake in the events section. And then you can see what events are happening at your school. And you'll see that right now there's probably like 3 or 4 job fairs already listed. And then you might also see there are events from all sorts of other employers that are having virtual events, things that you may not have ever heard of or thought existed. There might be a way for you to talk to an employer one-on-one to understand both is that employer you'd want to work for and at least make contact with them. It's like so incredibly important to like talk to these employers, even if you don't know what their company is about. It's better to know ahead of time, but even if you're just curious, like, okay, it's like, tell me about the products that you're creating because I'm interested in this. What types of stuff are you doing that's similar to that? And they might say like, oh, we have some similar products and services, and like, oh, what makes you interested in that? It's a good conversation to have no matter what you do. So there's virtual fairs, there's in-person fairs. Just check it out on Handshake. And then if you have your resume made up and put on your Handshake, they will look at it beforehand. Or if you're meeting in person, you can say like, hey, oh yeah, check, I have my resume on Handshake as well. And they can make a little note to check it out later. So anyway, it's just practice talking about your professional like dreams and ideas and interests and learning about what else is out there. So job fairs are very valuable. Just to conclude, we want you to succeed. We want you to be successful, and we're here to help. You can make a meeting with us. We can meet over and over again if you need any type of assistance. We're just here to help. So I hope to see you soon.